They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when the very blood you trust turns its back on you? I thought helping my sister would bring us closer. I sacrificed, I struggled, I gave her 6 months of rent sealed in an envelope. But instead of gratitude, I was met with betrayal that silenced the entire room. Today, I'm here to share not just my story, but the lesson behind giving too much to those who give you nothing in return. The decision to give my sister 6 months of rent wasn't one that happened overnight. It came from months of watching her struggle, hearing her voice crack when she spoke about bills piling up, and seeing the exhaustion written across her face every time she walked into the room. She had always been someone who carried herself with pride, but lately, that pride seemed chipped away by worry. Every conversation circled back to money, every plan she made ended with a sigh about not being able to afford it, and every night ended with her scrolling through her phone, trying to calculate how long she could stretch what little she had. I knew she would never come to me directly and ask for help, not because she didn't need it, but because she hated to admit she was drowning. I started thinking about it when I saw her refrigerator nearly empty one afternoon. There was nothing in it but half a bottle of juice and a carton of eggs. She laughed it off, saying she hadn't had time to shop, but I knew better. Her apartment was always neat, organized, and full of little touches of warmth. For it to look that bare, something was deeply wrong. That was the moment the idea began to take root in my mind. If I couldn't erase her struggles entirely, I could at least give her some breathing space. 6 months of rent might not solve every problem, but it would mean nights of peace without constant fear of eviction, mornings without the weight of unpaid bills pressing down on her, and days where she could focus on rebuilding rather than surviving. It wasn't easy for me either. Covering 6 months of someone's rent is no small act, especially when I had my own responsibilities to handle. I had to rearrange my own budget, skip out on a few things I had planned for myself, and even take on some extra work to ensure I could manage it without falling apart. But somehow, the sacrifice didn't feel like a burden. It felt like the right thing to do. Every dollar I put aside became a secret promise to myself that I would not let my sister sink further into despair. It was my way of telling her, even without words, that I had her back. I remember walking into the bank and requesting the money in neat bills. There was something almost ceremonial about it. Holding that stack of cash in my hands, I felt both the weight of the sacrifice and the lightness of the relief it might bring her. I didn't want to just hand it over casually. I wanted it to feel significant, like the moment it represented. So, I bought a thick envelope, sealed it tightly, and wrote her name across it. It wasn't just paper and money inside, it was months of my effort, my choices, my care, all condensed into something she could hold. The days leading up to the family party, I kept the envelope hidden in my drawer. Every night, I'd glance at it and imagine her reaction. Would she cry? Would she hug me? Would she finally feel the relief she had been craving for so long? Those thoughts carried me through the exhaustion of the extra shifts I worked. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even close friends, because I wanted the moment to be a surprise, something shared just between us. The family party itself seemed like the perfect place. Everyone would be there, and in a way, I thought it would amplify the moment. She'd see that despite whatever hardships we had endured in our family, someone still believed in her, someone was still willing to go the extra mile for her. I imagined the looks on everyone else's faces when they realized the depth of my gesture. But more than that, I wanted my sister to know that she mattered enough for me to sacrifice without hesitation. As I prepared to leave for the party that evening, I slipped the envelope into the inner pocket of my jacket. I could feel it there the whole time, pressing lightly against my chest, as if reminding me of the secret I carried. My heart beat a little faster at the thought of giving it to her, but it wasn't nerves in the traditional sense. It was anticipation, mixed with hope, mixed with a quiet fear that maybe she would refuse it. After all, she was proud, and pride has a way of making even the most desperate person turn down help they desperately need. Still, I convinced myself that when she saw what was inside, she wouldn't be able to deny the relief it could bring. When I arrived at the gathering, the laughter, chatter, and noise of clinking glasses surrounded me, but all I could focus on was her. She was smiling, trying to keep up appearances, but I saw the tiredness behind her eyes. She had dressed up nicely, as she always did, but the slight wear in her shoes and the faint stress lines across her forehead betrayed her reality. I clenched my fist around the envelope inside my jacket and promised myself that before the night ended, she would know she wasn't alone. It felt strange, holding on to such a big gesture while everyone else exchanged small talk and stories about their week. While they spoke about trivial things, I sat there with the weight of 6 months' rent folded into an envelope, waiting for the right moment to change my sister's life, even if just temporarily. My mind drifted back to all the sacrifices I had made leading up to that night, the choices I had made to ensure this was possible. None of it mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was seeing the look on her face when she realized what I had done for her. The moment of giving at the family party was one I had imagined in my head over and over, but reality always has a way of making things feel sharper, heavier, more alive. The room was buzzing with conversations, laughter echoing off the walls, plates clattering, glasses filling and refilling. The air smelled of food and perfume, of too many voices speaking at once, of old family tensions buried under shallow jokes. It wasn't just a gathering, it was one of those rare times when every branch of the family tree seemed to cram into one place, bringing with them their opinions, their glances, their unspoken rivalries. I had the envelope tucked inside my jacket the whole evening. Each time I reached for a drink or adjusted my seat, I felt it against me, like a steady heartbeat that kept reminding me of what I was there to do. My sister floated around the room, smiling at relatives, answering questions about her life with half-truths and vague responses. I knew her well enough to see through the performance. The curve of her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and when people laughed, she sometimes forced herself to laugh along a second too late. It was the smile of someone who didn't want anyone to know how fragile they truly were inside. I watched her from across the room, waiting for the right moment. Timing mattered. I didn't want it to feel like charity. I wanted it to feel like love, like family, like an anchor being thrown to someone who had been drowning for too long. But every time I thought about standing up, about walking across the room and handing her the envelope, I hesitated. What if she rejected it in front of everyone? What if she felt humiliated? What if she lashed out in pride rather than relief? Those thoughts battled inside me, but I kept reminding myself of why I had done this. I hadn't gone without so she could continue suffering. I had made sacrifices so she could breathe. Finally, the moment arrived when she sat down at the edge of the long table, away from the chaos, sipping her drink slowly as if she needed a break from all the noise. That was my chance. I walked over, every step feeling heavier than it should, my heart drumming in my chest. The envelope seemed to burn against my ribs as if it couldn't wait to escape my jacket. I pulled it out quietly, slid into the chair across from her, and waited until she noticed me. Her eyes flickered to mine, tired yet curious. I leaned in slightly, my voice low enough that only she could hear, and I placed the envelope on the table between us. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. I didn't want the whole room staring. It was small, discreet, intentional. She looked down at it, her brows knitting together, confusion flickering across her face. "What's this?" she whispered, her fingers hovering over the envelope but not touching it yet. "Open it," I said softly, trying to keep my tone calm, steady, though my pulse was racing faster than I liked. Her hand finally rested on the envelope. She picked it up, weighed it in her palm, and then glanced back at me as if searching for some clue. I didn't give her one. I just nodded, encouraging her silently. Slowly, she opened the flap, slid the bills halfway out, and froze. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes widening as the reality of what she was holding began to register. She looked back at me, her expression shifting through shock, disbelief, and something unreadable. "What is this?" she asked again, her voice cracking a little. "It's 6 months of rent," I told her simply, still keeping my voice low. "You don't have to worry about it for a while." Around us, the party continued like nothing had changed, but for me, the noise seemed to fade into a dull hum. All I could focus on was her reaction. Her hand trembled slightly as she gripped the envelope tighter, as if she wasn't sure whether to cling to it or shove it back at me. I expected tears, maybe gratitude, maybe even silence. Instead, she just stared at me, her jaw tight, her eyes glossing over with something that wasn't relief, but something else entirely. I could see her pride warring with her desperation in that single moment. It was in the way she held her breath, in the way she blinked too quickly, in the way her mouth opened and closed as though words were struggling to escape but couldn't form properly. I sat there, waiting, hoping she would see the gift for what it was, not an insult, not a handout, but a gesture of love and sacrifice. The envelope remained between her hands as the seconds dragged on. My palms began to sweat, my chest tightening as silence stretched like a wire ready to snap. I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down harder than ever, as though the moment I had rehearsed in my mind wasn't unfolding the way I had hoped. I had imagined warmth, connection, a bond restored through sacrifice. Instead, what I felt in her gaze was a storm I hadn't anticipated. Her shocking reaction is something that has been carved into my memory so vividly that even now, I can replay it frame by frame. After she pulled the money halfway out of the envelope and realized exactly what it was, the look on her face shifted from disbelief to something sharper. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her lips pressed into a thin line, and the warmth I had been expecting never arrived. Instead, it was as if I had just handed her something poisonous. The room around us was still filled with laughter, with forks scraping against plates and voices overlapping, but for me, all of that sound fell away. There was only her expression and the silence between us that grew heavier with every passing second. She set the envelope down on the table with a little too much force, the sound of it smacking the wood sharp enough to catch the attention of the cousin sitting nearby. He glanced over, but when she quickly gave a tight smile as if nothing was wrong, he turned back to his conversation. I kept waiting for her to look back at me, to say something, anything that might reveal gratitude or even surprise, but instead, she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "You think this fixes everything?" she muttered, her voice low but firm. The words cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't the tone of someone relieved, it was the tone of someone offended. My heart dropped. I had braced myself for a little resistance, maybe even a protest out of pride, but I hadn't prepared for outright rejection. "It's not about fixing everything," I whispered back, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's just to help, to give you some space to breathe." But her eyes, glossy and sharp all at once, told me she wasn't hearing it that way. She picked up the envelope again, held it between two fingers like it was contaminated, and shook her head. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice louder this time, loud enough that a few people sitting at the other end of the table turned their heads. Heat crept up my neck as I realized more eyes were now on us. I wanted this to be private, intimate, a quiet moment of relief, but now it was beginning to unravel in front of everyone. She opened the envelope wider, pulled the bills out just enough so that people around could see the stack of money, and then let out a short, bitter laugh. 6 months of rent, she announced, her voice tinged with sarcasm. My sibling thinks my life is worth 6 months of rent. A few relatives exchanged glances, uncomfortable and unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't heard. I sat frozen, my face burning, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I had pictured her smiling, maybe tearing up, maybe hugging me in front of everyone, but instead, she was making the envelope into some kind of spectacle. She placed the money back down and pushed it toward me. "Do you know what this looks like?" she hissed, leaning closer, her voice trembling not with gratitude but with anger. "It looks like pity. Like you're flaunting how much better you're doing than me. Do you think I need you to remind me I can't even handle my own rent?" The words stung because they weren't true, at least not in the way she imagined. I hadn't meant to flaunt anything, hadn't meant to pity her. I had meant to lift some of the weight off her shoulders, to quietly offer her a lifeline. But in her eyes, the gesture was twisted into something humiliating, something insulting. Around us, the chatter had dimmed, with people trying and failing to mask their curiosity. I could feel the weight of their eyes, the tension building like a storm cloud over the table. My sister's voice shook as she continued, her bitterness spilling out unchecked. "You think money can solve everything. You think sliding an envelope across a table makes you some kind of savior. But all it does is remind me of how far I've fallen, how useless I must look to you." I wanted to speak, to explain, to tell her that wasn't what this was about, but my throat felt tight. My words caught somewhere between my chest and my mouth. She was trembling now, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her jaw clenched tight. And in that moment, the room felt smaller, suffocating, as though the entire party had shifted its attention onto this one exchange. She shoved the envelope back toward me again, harder this time, the bills spilling slightly out of the flap. "I don't need your charity," she spat, her eyes locked onto mine with a mixture of pain and fury. "I don't need you to parade around like you're rescuing me." The silence that followed was deafening. No one dared to laugh anymore. No one dared to continue their conversations. My sister's voice had filled the space, sharp and raw, and now everyone sat in that echo. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the envelope that now lay between us once again, open and exposed, no longer a gift, but a symbol of something else entirely. The family's stunned silence was almost louder than the words that had just been spoken. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes naturally when a conversation lulls, but the heavy, suffocating kind that fills a room after something explosive has just torn through it. Forks hovered in midair, glasses were placed back down without a sip, and eyes darted across the table as if everyone was trying to figure out whether they had truly heard what they thought they had. The air that just moments before was filled with laughter and chatter now felt thick, uncomfortable, and unbreathable. I could feel every gaze shift toward us, even from relatives who had been engaged in their own side conversations. It was as though the entire room had contracted into one small bubble where all eyes were fixed on my sister, on me, on the envelope lying there like an accusation. I wanted to reach for it, to quietly tuck it back away and erase what had just happened, but my hand stayed frozen on the table. Any movement would have only made it worse. My mother was the first to break the silence, though she didn't say anything directly. She cleared her throat softly, the sound so forced it only highlighted the tension. Her eyes moved from me to my sister and back again, a look of confusion written across her face. She had no idea what to say, and for once, neither did anyone else. It was strange, seeing people who were usually so quick with opinions suddenly mute, afraid to step into a storm that wasn't theirs. My uncle shifted in his chair and tried to change the subject by laughing too loudly at something no one had said, but the effort fell flat. No one picked it up. The mood had already been poisoned, and every attempt to patch over it only made the cracks more visible. My cousin leaned over to another relative and whispered something, their eyes flicking toward me in a way that made my stomach twist. It wasn't just my sister who had humiliated me, it was the fact that now everyone else had witnessed it too. My sister, for her part, didn't seem to care about the silence she had created. She sat with her arms folded tightly, her body tense, her eyes still sharp with unspoken words. She didn't look ashamed or embarrassed, she looked defiant, as if daring anyone to take my side. And no one did. Not a single person opened their mouth to defend me. Not one relative leaned forward to tell her she was being unfair. They just sat there, stunned, caught between their loyalty to her and their shock at her reaction. I could feel the judgment in the air, even if no one voiced it. Some probably thought I had overstepped, that I shouldn't have given her money in such a setting. Others might have pitied me, watching as my act of sacrifice turned into a public spectacle. A few, I'm sure, quietly agreed with her, thinking I had flaunted the gesture too openly. Whatever their thoughts were, no one spoke them aloud. The silence was its own kind of punishment, its own kind of verdict, one that pressed down on me harder than her words ever could. The clinking of a spoon against a plate finally broke the stillness, a nervous habit from one of my younger cousins who clearly didn't know how else to deal with the atmosphere. A few forced conversations started up again in low tones, people talking about anything and everything just to distract themselves from the tension. But even as the chatter returned, it was thin, brittle, and everyone kept glancing back at the table where the envelope still lay. It was the unspoken centerpiece of the evening, the thing no one wanted to acknowledge but couldn't stop staring at. I sat there feeling smaller than I had in years. I had walked into that room with the envelope as a symbol of care, of sacrifice, of love. Now it lay exposed, turned into a symbol of shame, and no amount of words could take that back. My chest felt tight, my throat dry, and though I tried to focus on the glass of water in front of me, my hand shook too much to reach for it. I was hyper-aware of every detail around me, the faint sound of music still playing in the background, the flicker of a candle in the middle of the table, the way someone coughed deliberately as though to cover the awkward silence. Every detail seemed magnified because I was desperate to think about anything other than the envelope and the weight of the eyes on me. What hurt most wasn't just her reaction, but the absence of anyone stepping in to soften the blow. Family gatherings had always been loud, messy, full of interruptions and opinions flying left and right, but now no one dared to speak. It was as if my sister's anger had cast a spell over everyone, paralyzing them. And in that silence, I realized something more painful than her words, that I was completely alone in that moment, left to carry the humiliation with no one willing to share it, no one willing to stand beside me. The hidden truth revealed later did not come to me all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a shadow creeping across the floor until it covered everything. At first, I tried to convince myself that my sister's outburst at the party had been fueled by pride, by the embarrassment of being seen as someone who needed help. I told myself that maybe she just couldn't accept it in front of everyone, that later she would come to me quietly, explain herself, and take the envelope with the gratitude I had hoped for. But days passed, and no such moment arrived. Instead, there was silence. Not the heavy silence of that party, but the colder silence of distance. She didn't call, she didn't text, and when I finally tried reaching out, her responses were clipped, almost mechanical, as if she wanted to cut the conversation short before it even began. The truth began to leak through in fragments. A cousin mentioned offhandedly that she had been talking badly about me after the party, claiming I had only given her the money to humiliate her, to prove to the rest of the family that I was better than her. At first, I brushed it off, unwilling to believe she would twist my intentions so cruelly. But then another relative hinted that she had been telling people I wasn't as generous as I seemed, that I had used the envelope as a way to control her, to remind her of how dependent she was. The more I heard, the clearer it became that she wasn't just upset in the moment. She was rewriting the story, turning my act of sacrifice into a weapon against me. The envelope itself became a point of gossip. Some family members whispered about how much money had been inside. Others speculated why I had chosen that night of all nights to give it. A few even suggested I had done it for attention, that I wanted to look like a savior in front of everyone. The more the story spread, the less it resembled the truth. My intentions, my struggles, my sacrifices, none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the version my sister was feeding them, and she made sure to paint herself as the victim. I didn't understand why she would go that far. I thought back to all the little signs I had ignored, the way she had stiffened whenever anyone compared us, the way her voice sometimes carried an edge when she spoke about my job or my stability, the way she avoided asking me for help even when she clearly needed it. There had always been a quiet competition between us, one I never wanted to participate in, but one she seemed to carry inside her like a wound that never healed. My gift, which I thought would ease her burden, had instead poured salt into that wound, reminding her of every way she felt she had fallen behind. The truth I had to face was that it wasn't just about money. It wasn't about rent, or bills, or even pride. It was about resentment. She resented that I had been able to provide when she could not, that I had chosen to step in when she believed it made her look weak. To her, the envelope was not a lifeline but a mirror, reflecting all the things she hated about her current situation. And instead of looking into that mirror and seeing love behind it, she smashed it, leaving me to bleed from the shards. I began to hear more pieces of the puzzle from unexpected places. A friend of hers, someone she had confided in, told me she had felt cornered at the party. She believed I had planned it that way, that I wanted everyone to witness her dependence on me, that I had deliberately chosen a public stage to show off my generosity. It shocked me to know she could think so little of me, to believe that my sacrifices were nothing more than performances. I wanted to scream that she didn't know how many nights I had stayed awake calculating how to afford covering her rent, how many hours I had worked just to make it possible, how much of myself I had given up to ensure she didn't have to drown. But screaming wouldn't have changed anything, because in her mind, the story had already been rewritten. What made the truth even heavier was realizing that some family members sided with her, not openly but quietly. Their glances, their hesitant smiles, their sudden distance, it all added up. They didn't want to choose sides, but by giving her silence, by letting her narrative stand unchallenged, they allowed her version to spread like wildfire. I was left standing on the ashes of what I thought was an act of love, watching it turn into something ugly I couldn't recognize. The final blow came when I discovered she hadn't even needed the money in the way I thought she did. Yes, she had been struggling, but not to the degree she made everyone believe. She had already found a way to manage her rent, piecing together side work and help from another source she never mentioned. My envelope had not been a rescue, but an intrusion, an unwanted reminder that I was stepping into a place she had convinced herself she could handle alone. That was the truth she never said aloud, but allowed to seep out through anger and resentment. It wasn't that she couldn't accept my help, it was that she didn't want it from me. Not because she didn't need it, but because taking it meant admitting that I was the one who had saved her. And in her eyes, that was a defeat she couldn't bear to live with. The revenge that changed everything did not come from rage that burned hot and wild, but from a colder place, a place carved out of disappointment, betrayal, and a kind of exhaustion that only grows when you've given too much to someone who spits it back in your face. For weeks after the family party, I carried the humiliation with me, not just because of what my sister had said, but because of how everyone else had witnessed it and then quietly turned away. The whispers, the side glances, the subtle shifts in tone whenever people spoke to me, they all piled on, until the weight of it became too much to ignore. I had sacrificed for her, rearranged my own life to make hers easier, and instead of gratitude I was left with shame. It was then I realized the only way forward was to stop being the person who carried everyone else's burdens and start making them carry the weight of their own actions. Revenge, for me, did not mean shouting or fighting. It meant pulling back every ounce of energy I had once poured into her life. I stopped calling, stopped checking in, stopped offering help. When family members asked me about her, I gave short, detached answers, no longer stepping in to defend her or cover for her struggles. The silence I gave her was deliberate, and unlike the silence she had given me, mine had weight. It forced her to stand in the very spotlight she had dragged me into, only this time she didn't have me shielding her from the consequences. The first step of my revenge was refusing to be the safety net she had always expected me to be. Whenever she hinted at needing help, I responded with polite indifference. Where once I might have rushed in with solutions, now I simply nodded and let the moment pass. It shocked her at first. She wasn't used to me stepping back. She had spent years knowing I would always be the one to pick her up, to offer what she couldn't ask for directly. Taking that away wasn't just withholding money or favors, it was stripping her of the comfort she had taken for granted. The second part of my revenge was even quieter, but far more powerful. I let the truth about my sacrifices slip out in ways she never expected. A conversation here, a casual mention there, just enough for others to start piecing together the reality she had tried to bury. I never exaggerated, never spoke in anger, just laid out the facts of what I had done, what I had given, and how it had been thrown back at me. Slowly, the whispers around the family shifted. Where before they had doubted my intentions, now they began to question hers. I saw it in the way their eyes lingered on her, the way they hesitated before taking her words at face value. The story she had spun about me unraveled thread by thread, until she was left exposed. Revenge also came in the form of success, not loud, bragging success, but the quiet, undeniable kind that could not be ignored. I focused harder on myself, on my own work, my own goals, my own life. Every achievement became another reminder to her that no matter how hard she tried to paint me as the villain, I was still moving forward while she remained stuck. She couldn't twist that truth, no matter how much she resented it. And while I never flaunted it, I didn't hide it either. Every step I took toward bettering myself became another invisible wall between us, one she could not climb over no matter how she tried. There was one moment in particular that crystallized everything. At another family gathering months later, she tried to make a subtle jab at me, a half smile paired with a comment meant to draw laughter at my expense. But the room didn't respond the way it once might have. Instead of joining her, people exchanged looks, some even shaking their heads. The silence that followed this time was not aimed at me, it was aimed at her. In that instant, she felt the weight of the same humiliation she had once forced on me, only now it was hers to bear. I didn't need to raise my voice or defend myself. The truth had already done the work for me. Revenge also meant reclaiming my peace. I stopped replaying that night in my head, stopped carrying the guilt of her reaction as if it were my fault. I began to understand that sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is simply refusing to let someone's bitterness poison you any longer. By no longer giving her the power to define me, I had taken back control. She could gossip, she could twist stories, she could try to make me look small, but none of it mattered anymore because I had already stepped out of the role she wanted me to play. The final piece of my revenge was the realization that I no longer needed her approval, her gratitude, or even her acknowledgement. For years, I had given and given, hoping that one day she would see me, truly see me, for what I was trying to do. But she never did, and once I stopped waiting for it, I was free. That freedom itself was revenge, because it meant she could no longer hurt me the way she once did. Every cold look, every bitter word, every attempt to shame me fell flat, because I no longer carried the weight of caring what she thought.